When you think about most human service organizations, they're so pressed for coverage that your new hires really do get rushed into providing direct care within a matter of days. And although that might solve the short-term staffing gap, what it does, it really creates a long-term problem. I would say one of our most defining parts of Melmark's workforce model. It's an extended onboarding process, but I usually, to make it clear, it's not like a traditional orientation. Between week 1 being the foundation and week 2 of training being application and performance practice, that's where we really get into a lot of activities that have role plays, that have performance feedback embedded in there. They actually have to pass a series of performance checklists at a very high level, usually at 100%. They also have to pass a final exam.
It almost sounds like a rite of passage, like you passed, you're in, like now you're in, now you're one of us. I mean, I don't know if does it feel that way for new hires?
Most of them feel very satisfied, really confident, and in fact, like one person wrote in a recent survey, ready to tackle the world.
Welcome to IDD Leader, where human services leaders grow their impact, lead with heart, and build the workplaces our field deserves. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. Let me start with a sentence that might sting a little. Sitting at a computer is not training. In today's episode, Helena Maguire from Melmark explains why most onboarding systems unintentionally push new hires out the door and how Melmark flipped that script. Their approach is slower, it's more deliberate, and it's designed to build confidence before coverage. The result? About 11% annual turnover in a field where many providers are experiencing 4 to 5 times that. In this conversation, Helena walks through Melmark's extended onboarding model, how they train for competence, not compliance, and why culture isn't created through games, raffles, and pizza parties, but through its systems. And people actually succeed through their system work. And if this conversation leaves you thinking that you might need to rethink some of your onboarding, but you're not even sure where to start, I've got great news. I'll be sharing more at the end, but there's a free virtual session coming up in partnership with Direct Support Workforce Solutions out of the University of Minnesota. I'll share, like I said, more about that at the end. All right, well, this is part 2 of my conversation, and without further ado, let's dive in. What does orientation look like for a new, we'll just say entry level, but entry level position there at Melmark?
Yeah. Sure. This is I would say one of our most defining parts of Melmark's workforce model. It's an extended onboarding process, but I usually, to make it clear, it's not like a traditional orientation. It's not the check the box, model. It's very deliberate. It's really, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a deliberate investment. We're investing in competence and confident staff, as well as culture, really from day one. And I hope people are talking about their culture on day one when they bring in new staff, right? And so the philosophy really is, let's prepare them really well before we're actually expecting them to perform on the spot with real life people in front of them, right? Let's prepare them really well. And so that's counterintuitive when you think about most human service organizations. They're so pressed for coverage. It's, vacancy factors might be crazy out of the roof, and they're so pressed for coverage that your new hires really do get rushed into providing direct care within a matter of days. And although that might solve the short-term staffing gap, what it does, it really creates a long-term problem. And that's what I like to slow people down about. Those long-term problems include staff just don't feel confident. I just started 3 days ago, day 4, I'm on. Great, and being on doesn't mean that there's necessarily then a curated on-the-job training model to follow that. It means you're on. Like, oh, you read the behavior support plan. Great, you're trained. Go, right? And we know reading is not training. It's the two just are not equivalent there, right? So the other part too is what we find is that new staff that are rushed into being on shift after a few days of orientation. Then you have the supervisor dynamic, where because you have a poorly trained new hire, and the supervisor might be present, might be observing them. Now they're in this cycle of correcting error after error after error, mistakes after mistakes, right? So it's creating this already really adverse relationship because you just might be providing way too much negative information about performance to this new hire. And then typically when we actually look at the research that's out there around turnover, especially in human services, those first 90 days are critical. That's
Mm.
actually where you will see the highest amount of turnover. So we just decided we need to flip that script, right, and invest early, build up skills, be supportive, and really essentially assess, are we creating stable work environments for everybody, and so that week one is really about foundation laying, and that's where we get into right out of the gate the mission, the philosophy, the work culture that we're hopefully imparting and have alignment with. And then there, of course, we're covering who we serve, what to expect. We serve really complex, severe, behaviorally challenging individuals. And so we need to align that folks truly understood what that meant from interview to you're now hired and you're in training. Do you really understand that, right? And even our interview process is a two-part process. We actually have them observe before they're ever even offered a position in our environments, because we want to make sure that that's truly a setting they can see themselves perform
Mm.
in. And so really part of between week one being the foundation and week two of training being application and performance practice, right? That's where we really get into a lot of activities that have role plays, that have performance feedback embedded in there. And then in very controlled fashion, we're taking them into live environments and they're practicing those skills set again, very controlled with supervision, with modeling, with feedback, but they're getting that exposure within their first 10 to 14 days of that onboarding experience.
And then what happens after that?
So if they pass, and I always say that if they pass, they actually have to pass a series of performance checklists at a very high level, usually at 100%. They also have to pass a final exam. It sounds really daunting, but we have supported them with a lot of information material, but they do have to do a written exam as well. Assuming that they pass, and 95% of our cohorts do pass, they then enter into phase two, which is at their real life dedicated site. That's where their on the job training sequence begins.
Okay, so I'm really taking this in. If they It does sound daunting. I think many providers, to pass the test, they just simply check for a pulse. And I don't mean that I don't mean that to be rude, but what happens is desperate times are calling for desperate measures, and that sick cycle just is so self-perpetuating that it's, I think, very difficult for providers to get off of that. No one thinks that's best practice, but you guys aren't just upping that a little bit. This sounds really impactful. If 95% are passing, then it almost, maybe this is too dramatic. It almost sounds like a rite of passage, like you passed, you're in, like now you're in, now you're one of us. I mean, I don't know if does it feel that way for new hires? Do they feel like I made it in? Or, I mean, maybe that's more dramatic than it really is.
I will say they do a survey at the end of their training program, so they do evaluate every training session they received, who trained it, the content, their own performance, did they like it, not like it, what do they want to tell us? So we do know through our surveys, most of them feel very satisfied, really confident, and in fact, like one person wrote in a recent survey, ready to tackle the world. And I
Wow.
thought, that's it, right? That's the empowerment piece where we say we're building confidence alongside skills, right? To have the confidence that I have really good skills to start this journey in my career is, I think, one of the things that we reflect on and say, we're on the right track. We're on the right track. If people are leaving orientation, ready to start their on-the-job training, and they're really optimistic about their success.
Yeah. No,
And
absolutely.
and I want to be clear, the test thing comes up. It's not just the test part, but we do have staff members where English is not their first language. And so we have had to become really good about adapting the test, a variety of languages. Some people, regardless of the language of the test, are not great test takers. And we know that. And so we've adapted taking the test. And I'm just using that as an example in many ways where it's like, just tell me about it. Like you just verbally answer the questions with me, or show me. So we have really adapted that because we do recognize adult learners are in of themselves as adult learners. There's just challenges, right? Learning
Yeah.
later in life new concepts. And so we have to be flexible to really understand that this person doesn't have the skill because they just can't understand the material, or is it really just a performance? They're not motivated to perform that skill, right? So we have to make those decisions, and we don't want to sacrifice a staff member that might be actually really, really good, but they just couldn't pass the test.
Yeah. That's great. And yeah, if someone's got dyslexia or something, that the words on a page might be an unnecessary barrier because the concept is there and the ability to do it, sure, or lots of other examples besides just that one. But
Yeah,
sure,
and it's an important factor because when they are on the job, they will need to be able to read, retain information via the behavior support plans or the ISP plan or the IEP. So there is a reading and a writing component that is an underlying function of their job. But we do know as sophisticated trainers, we can do a lot of adaptations so
right.
that they can learn that information in a way that's digestible for them.
Okay. So phase two, let's just keep playing this out. So they've passed the test. You maybe even start telling me about phase two, and I was just still so enamored or thinking so much about phase one there. But let's keep playing this out. So I made it. I passed the test. I got hired by Melmark. I did all this stuff. I passed the test. What's happening next?
So the on-the-job training phase is where you are now in your dedicated work site, where that might be. It might be a classroom, could be a residential program, it could be a home-based setting. So in your designated setting, you then have a series of sessions where a supervisor will train you directly on the targeted skills that you're going to need in that setting. So in a classroom or residential setting, it might be our first phase is we're going to make sure that you're developing rapport actually with the individuals that you serve. That's the only thing we're going to work on today. So you're going to watch me do it, then you're going to try to do it. Then I'm going to give you some modeling or additional feedback and remodel in certain areas until we have deemed you competent in the interactional profile of this individual, right? And so those sessions will be earmarked with particular skills that staff members will be trained with their supervisors on a daily basis until, again, their competency. Series of checklists, competency passing scores, and then ultimately, once they've demonstrated that across all of the clients they're going to be working with, then essentially they're not left alone because they're working alongside people, but they're allowed to then be working independently in ratio with those individuals.
So how long does that take? So someone passes the test, they've on to phase two. How long until they're likely to be independent? Recognizing it could maybe vary based on what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, at a minimum, we're talking probably about another 2 weeks at a minimum. I would say it in our more difficult cases, meaning it was not that the staff was difficult, but we have really complex individuals,
Sure.
and you're not going to master that, just in a day or 2 days. That might go on for about 4 weeks, would be probably the highest end of the range
Okay, so
that
two
we've
to four
seen.
weeks.
Yeah, because that just means you're ready to get rolling, independently working. It doesn't phase out the supervisory checks that will
Right.
then continue on a weekly basis, right? So it doesn't phase out. Training still continues. It just evolves differently. It will look different.
Yeah. So how often then do direct support professionals, let's just say in a residential setting, direct support professional, residential setting, they're they're decently long tenured, so they've been there a few years, we'll say. How often are they having um, either informal? I heard you say quarterly as far as like performance eval, but how often are they having informal or even just a one to one that's not your performance eval, but that's actually really talking about if I'm that individual, my own development as a staff person? Is that happening? Weekly, monthly? How
Right.
how?
So each week you're still being observed by your supervisor. That's an opportunity to talk about how you're developing, not just in those particular skills we observed today, but overall. Are there other areas you want me to target that maybe I didn't observe today? However, every month, once a month, there is more of a formalized monthly check-in and
Okay.
supervision where it's more important that with the employees actually coming to the table with here are maybe concerns I have or questions I have or areas that I need more information about. So they do have those dedicated monthly
Like a
supervision
one to one
sessions.
sit down.
Exactly.
But this checklist is happening on a weekly basis?
Right, right. So structurally, in all of our settings, but in this case, let's say it's the residential setting, our program managers, that frontline supervisor, they work uh, well, they work 4 out of their 5 days during the core service hours. So they're working the evening hours. And then on the weekends, they have at least 1 week in a month that they rotate in and out. So during that time is when they're doing a lot of their observations and performance feedback sessions with staff.
Okay. Let's just jump right into this schedule thing. You referenced this earlier, I believe. How do you guys approach scheduling? And let's start with that round the clock, the residential 24/7, because that's typically the toughest, right? If you're saying, hey,
Yeah,
would you like to
it
work eight
really
to
is.
five? Most people are pretty amenable to that schedule.
Yeah,
But if you're saying,
yeah.
hey, we've got to cover, the 24/7, the round the clock stuff, how do you guys approach scheduling with that? Is that site specific? Is that like one model or system framework that goes over the whole organization? How do you
Yeah.
guys do it?
So for our residential settings, and I'll be honest with you, we've experimented with the several shifts, innovations and scheduling options over the years. And part of that is when we're experimenting with it, it's because there's a concern about either turnover or fatigue. So we've received information, staff have been very upfront about it, so we kind of need to take a look at it. So um, for our residential group, we do have more of a compressed work week. It's typically about a 4-day model for our residential group. And 3 days during the week and a weekend, right? And that came out of a lot of feedback over the years that residential staff feel better when they then have their 3 days off in a row, or even 2 days off in a row, and then a third somewhere else in the week. And that has become, I think, more of our standard residential model that you have one half of the week or the other half of the week. And essentially for staff, the payoff is that they actually feel very well rested by the time they come back in. So that's that's pretty much across, I would say, our children and our adult residential programs that's been in play. Very little feedback around changing it has happened, but when it does, it makes us take a look at what needs to change. And I'll be honest with you, our overnight shift for our overnight staff, nobody ever wants to change their schedules at all. It's perfect. They like how it is. Yeah, I think that's been the shift that we've had the least amount of like scheduling changes to. Um, but then obviously we have our day settings and it's Monday through Friday and it's, a traditional school day or an adult day program day. And so there's limitations in being able to have flexible schedules or, split schedules even in some cases. Are there outliers at times? Certainly there are, I think personal situations that do occur with our staff in their life that they temporarily might need to come up with a schedule that's just not the norm. And so we'll consider that and we'll evaluate that. And ultimately, if it has no impact on service delivery, but has great impact on staff morale and the ability to, actually stay employed and come to work, we probably would defer to that.
Okay. Switching gears, instead of employee of the month, you tie rewards to actual performance data. At least that's my understanding of it. Can you share an example of how that works and what kind of impact you've seen on motivation?
Yes. So, our objective is to always be fair and equitable, and also make whatever level of reinforcement or rewards or anything in that line meaningful, to our employees. And so we try to stay away from what we consider subjective recognition, such as like Employee of the Month. And I'm not. We have done that many, many, many years ago. We certainly tried that out. There's no absolute or even judgment on my part. It's something that we did attempt to do many years ago when we first started Melmark, and it didn't work out the way we intended. And that's what the data showed us, right? And so tying pay into performance, as well as having other reinforcement available for staff for performance, has really become the model that we choose to use. And so when all of these systems we've curated, where we're observing you and we have checklists, you're receiving a lot of reinforcement right in the spot, right on the job. In that moment, you're receiving a lot of verbal feedback and praise and reinforcement. And it really is, at times, what we have found out from our staff surveys, one of the most meaningful parts of what they enjoy is that the feedback's not scary. It's actually they're walking out feeling really good, and they can count on that supervisor. They trust that supervisor to give them feedback that's meaningful for their own performance, right? So I think that's a big piece. But part of those checklists, they also understand is having the appropriate performance on those checklists over time, because that will tie into then their performance increases. We also have bonuses throughout the year. So there's a link for staff that they understand that those things are available to them and they will get them, pay for performance, as long as they're obviously engaged and meeting their skill set on these performance checklists. So
So,
it's
it's
very
tied to,
transparent.
is it tied to the checklist then?
Right. So those checklists tie into their appraisal system.
How quickly, if someone, let's suppose I was kind of we won't say slacker, but I knew how to do enough to not get fired, and I didn't do a whole lot more than that. And so I really wasn't hitting probably the most, performance. And then I decide, wait, I actually really would like to get paid more. I really would like to apply myself to this job. And so whatever, I changed my performance. How quickly am I going to feel the effects of that or see the effects on a paycheck or in whatever other methods? And what methods is it? Is it just strictly extra pay, or are there other,
It's
gift card
definitely
drawings or what?
well, no, uh, certainly intermittently, I'm sure we have some or more of those contrived contingencies, but essentially it's their annual performance. It's their annual increase based off their performance that year, and they are evaluated every quarter, so they know how they are progressing until that year mark. That's one. But we do have two bonuses a year, typically around the holiday season and I think midway through the year. And a part of that bonus is tied to performance. You have to be at a performance level that's acceptable. It's not that you just showed up to work, right? And but on the other side, what I like to make clear is we're also not going to tolerate folks who just kind of show up to work and are only doing the bare minimum. That is not good for the morale in that specific setting, and it's really not acceptable because it does mean there's probably service delivery not at its richest quality level that's occurring, and that's a problem for us. You know, so
So I
you
probably would
can't
have already
really
gotten
be.
fired in this scenario. Okay, I got you. I got you. I hear you loud and clear. Yes.
We probably took care of business already.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. I like it. Well, that says a lot. That says a whole lot to me. In fact, what that says to me is you're not afraid to lose people, uh, and therefore lower your standards, but that you're going to have high standards and expect people to step up to meet those standards, and then trust the results will follow from there.
You did a really good job summing that up. Um, the key to all of this is we are being transparent, right? Staff uh, uh, staff know exactly what behaviors, what the expectations are. They're reinforced for that. And if they are achieving, continued satisfactory levels of performance, that reinforcement continues to flow, right? So it's very transparent how I get what I need and what you give me. Um, and that's a system that's really important to cultivate in your work setting because it should feel achievable. It should feel equitable, right? There's no different rules for you than there are for me. The rules are the same. And at the end of the day, it's a clear path to success. What we've seen is it's overall a very positive impact because there is higher motivation among staff working in teams, right? We are actually seeing better consistency in the clinical work that we're doing, but more importantly, there's actually a really strong sense of teamwork and ownership over the work that we're all supposedly mission driven. That's what we all we're tied in to do. So for the most part, what we do here is sometimes when there's those slackers in the workforce, we actually hear from their colleagues that they're, dragging me down, something. Not that they're tattletaling, but at the end of the day, they're making it clear that, listen, I'm suffering too as a staff when the staff comes in and doesn't actually implement the right interventions or isn't here for the same reason. My morale now is being impacted. So we try to equalize all that and be very transparent, but also just be very consistent about applying the rules and the policies, but really a system in which people ultimately are thriving, receiving reinforcement, and at the end of the day, know exactly what their pathway can be.
You've talked, I mean, I've heard the word system many times. That's been an oft repeated word today. I don't think I've heard you say the word culture more than maybe once or twice. And yet, what you're describing is, in fact, a culture driver. I mean, you've just described very systematically what a winning team, how to create a winning team, and what it would feel like and look like to be on a winning team. And I think that's profound. I'm just taking that in. I think that's profound because it's something that I think every agency wants. We want to have a good, healthy culture and a strong culture and a mission-oriented culture, whatever are the words in front of there. But we've just taken a good little while here to start to unpack. I mean, I'm sure there's way more layers to this, but we started to unpack some of the how in a way that sounds very replicable. And
Yeah. I was just going to say, cultures is the terminal goal, building a culture, investing in culture, and moving our culture forward, right? That's the terminal goal. That's the all the reasons why we've created these interrelated supportive structures. It's building that. It wasn't just building the foundation, but it's now sustaining that, right? I think there are plenty of organizations that think culture is an afterthought, right? If we play these games, if we, have these raffles, if we, essentially bring in these more artificial, contrived things that people might like and might want to work with, they're going to feel good and therefore we have a great culture. They might feel good in the moment. Everybody likes winning a prize. But if once the prize and the value of that prize has diminished and there's really no infrastructure to support maintaining high levels of performance and feeling good and receiving reinforcement on really consistent, appropriate frequencies, then there is no culture. The culture is, only dependent on as good as we play games or on these artificial, raffles that we want to do. So I do think that's often a concern of mine when when we're out at conferences and presenting, we talk to a lot of small providers, middle providers, big providers, and this is often a discussion they have is how do we actually even get this done? It sounds like, we would need A, B, C, and D. And, our work culture is non-existent. So should I do A? And the point is you can't just do one thing. You really have to engineer I'm going to say it again, a system of care, right? That cares about all from staff to those that we serve and in between their parents, their guardians, other stakeholders. You have to create a system that actually is engineered for that one terminal goal for all of us: quality, high services. And at the end of the day, that staff investment, motivation, and morale is the culture, right? So it's not an easy topic to unpack, and it is one that takes years of really having meaningful dedication, dedicated time to deciding how to build that infrastructure. What's my first move, then my second move, and how do I analyze that and make really good database decisions, right? As I build these layers. So it's not it's not an easy thing, but yeah, culture is what you're building when you build systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I I I can't remember if I prepped you for this, so if this is on too much on the spot, we'll just pass over it and that's fine. Do you happen to know like what your retention numbers are at all, or your vacancy numbers, or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
And are you able to share it?
Yes, if I can recall off the top of my head, our retention number, we were recently just looking at our metrics. Our retention number was somewhere about 86.5, 87. Um, and that was just for the last quarter or so that we were looking at it. And then I think our turnover was at about 11%, which we're not happy with.
Okay. That's 11% in a quarter or in a year or in a, do you know?
No, the 11% was for the year that we
That's
did
an
do for
annual.
the
That's an
year.
annual.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was the annual.
And then
Um,
do you guys have do you know what your vacancy rate is by chance?
I don't know that off the top of my head right now.
If your turnover's that low, that's makes me think that you're probably not having just oodles of vacancies sitting open for extended periods of time. Um,
Yeah,
but
I mean, I would probably say the line that we've had, some difficulty with would be our front line. Um, but within the cycle, we've also developed new programs. And, with expansion and some new programs, there's that artificial
no,
phase
it
where,
just puts it, yeah, it puts the vacancy all of a sudden super high, but it's not a reflection of a problem. It's a reflection of growth.
that's right. That's right.
Are other providers beating down your doors to find out how they can implement these things at their organizations?
I don't know if they're beating down our doors, but we have regular inquiries, especially if we've had recent, as I was saying earlier, conference presentations that we've spoken at, where we are very public and transparent about this is where we started, this is where we are today, this is what we did in between, right? We are disseminating as much of what worked and what didn't work. Those are the folks, who are trying to start their own organizations, could be even small businesses. They're the ones asking for how to replicate this in different stages. We also are at times contacted by other states. As I said, we're multi-state, so we're Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. And so in those states and surrounding states, there's some interest around how we have built either our private approved private special education schools or day programs, residential as well, because some of those states just don't have those services there. And so there's an interest around how to build a model that's sustainable.
Now, I know that you just referenced this. I know that you guys have extensive published works from. I think you're one of the authors on some of these things, but it's not just you. There's quite a few, I think, from Melmark, and so that certainly adds to this idea of dissemination. Is there, if a provider was listening today and they're like, okay, I can read your stuff, but like, is there kind of like a
can I sign up? Like, do you have like a membership or a cohort of that to where this really replicates? Like, is there do you have an export system for this, or is that sort of still kind of a little bit of a one-off here and there as people contact and then just start to pull on that way? Or do you guys kind of have even a system of replication set up at this point?
Yeah, well, interesting enough, our North Carolina site that we operate right now, that was actually a replication of our Massachusetts program, right? And so, and although it's a Melmark entity, it was really our big like, okay, we're gonna test out all of these systems and see if it can work, right? So aside from that being our own internal organization, that's exactly the stage that we're at right now with the level of requests that we're getting across other small organizations as well as in different states. We are looking to start to implement and replicate this model by first building the infrastructure and really working alongside that that person of interest, really working alongside around what resources they have, what they'll need. So really in those preliminary stages.
Okay, yeah. I mean, what I hear a tremendous uh, social franchising opportunity, if it could almost be called that. At least that's the term I've heard when it's not an ownership, when it's done like in the nonprofit world, where you're basically it's kind of like dissemination on a whole different level, but where it's such a robust model that's of replication, not just the concepts that are driving it at yours. But I don't know. I hear that. I hear that in what you're saying that there's an opportunity for that kind of a thing. I don't know if that's a term you guys use, but I hear that, and I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised if people are really wanting this because in our conversation, what I've heard is not just ideas of what would be good, but I hear the success of what has been good, and that often that's a big gap that's hard to achieve. I mean, to for many on many facets of life, right? It's hard to achieve when we see the goal, we see what it could look like, but then to actually have kind of steps A through Z to actually get there.
And we're certainly not professing to knowing it all. What we're doing is sharing, I think, a pretty evidence-based way of informing organizations around critical aspects to drive quality services, right? And so we also know not every organization can maybe build the different levels of infrastructure they need because funding is a problem. Uh, there's a variety of different variables, right, that we would have to assess in order to decide what's really replicable in those settings. I think the most important part for us in terms of the dissemination and really kind of those practitioner guides that we've put out there and the work that we're trying to do with other organizations is recognizing that not everybody will have access to a Melmark if they're an individual that needs services, right? But it doesn't mean that as a field of behavior analysts and practitioners that we can't support each other by still raising the bar on how to bring services to our most vulnerable in a variety of different locations to still that next higher level. And so if there's an interest, there is a way, and it might not be 100% of the Melmark model, but it might be 50%, and that's still pretty good from where we are right now at a baseline level. I think the other thing we're also trying to put across is senior leadership, those in the CEO, the COO, those chief executives, right? They have to be part of that process that it has bought into it, understands the significance, and can help drive the importance behind implementing, designing, implementing, and then supporting with the appropriate resources, getting that level of system out to their organization, right? So that's also part of our goal is that you could not achieve the building part, not the physical building, but the building and engineering of these different pieces without there being at the highest level of leadership a commitment to ensuring that this is what we're doing, right? So we do need to also make to get that point across, right? Leadership has to drive this and has to, or at least buy into it if it's brought to their attention, right? Buy into it, understand it a little bit better. And we have to inform them about best practice. Not everybody who's a CEO is a board certified behavior analyst, and not everybody who's a CEO knows about OBM, right? So there's that understanding that as practitioners and BCBAs ourselves, if we're working in a organization that we know the CEO doesn't have an understanding of OBM and doesn't have an understanding of how we need to create supportive structures, we're compelled to address that.
Yes, absolutely. And that buy-in at every level, but if it doesn't, I mean, if it's not at the top, it simply won't happen. And that would be absolutely crucial and critical for this for any organization to adopt, whether that's all or part of what you guys are talking about. Yeah, that's crucial. Now, I want to kind of, I guess, just maybe end with this last question. If there's a leader that's listening and they're at a kind of a smaller provider and they're feeling both excited but maybe a little bit overwhelmed, what's the first step that they should take, or where even can they start to connect with you guys and not just kind of wait for a conference?
Well, number one, they can totally through our website just contact us, if they need any support and any consultation. We we'll do things over the phone, we'll, virtually. I think our commitment is that we don't care how small or how big, we don't care what position people are in. If somebody needs help, that's our job, right? That's our job to go out there and help. Um, and the reality is that it can be very overwhelming. And so that first call where we're trying to listen to what they need, it really is about also assuring that person, like, this is a marathon. Like, we got to pace ourselves. We got to really look at, where their organization is at and start to match that with, okay, here are some general variables we look at as to where to start. Right. So we are, completely accessible, and we just tend to run into people a lot at our conference circuit, as I call it, because that people are out there looking for information. They are 100% concerned about the state of affairs in their organization, or as professionals, they feel the call to do something better, right? And they're trying to figure out what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been eye-opening and really just outstanding to hear about what you guys have going on there at Melmark. I mean, I hear you. It's a work in progress, as it should be. It's not like, I mean, the grass only looks greener until you get there, and then you realize, oh, there's just still a lot to be done. But I really appreciate your time and all the things you've shared, and I'm sure every listener's probably really taken a lot of great information from what you've just shared. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. 11% turnover. Are you kidding me? That's outstanding. Listen, as we wrap up, I always try to leave you with an action move. Here's one for today. Slow down your onboarding on purpose. Identify one skill that new hires consistently struggle with in their first 30 days, then redesign just that one skill using a simple sequence. Watch it, practice it, get feedback, and then repeat. Even small changes here can dramatically reduce early turnover and relieve supervisors who are constantly correcting instead of coaching. And as I said at the beginning, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, we need help building systems like this without blowing up our entire operation, I've got great news. I'm partnering together with the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration, specifically the Direct Support Workforce Solutions, and we're hosting a Leadership Lens series together. The first one's January 29th. You can get all the details of this free event at iddleader.com. Right on the homepage, there's a banner at the top, and you can register as well. Thank you so much for listening. Together, we can stop cycling through staff and start building confident teams that stay. Well, until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.